Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm a migrants' rights campaigner and I'm also a Londoner. So I was really interested this last week when I saw how the right-wing press has picked up on the idea that London in particular has a big problem with illegal immigration. I think this all started with the front page splash on the Telegraph on the 22nd of January that said that 1 in 12 of us Londoners is in fact an illegal immigrant. And just before you rush off to check if one of them is hiding under your bed or behind your sofa cushions, if you're a Londoner like me, don't worry. That number is completely overblown, and if it smells of bullshit, it quite often is bullshit. In this case, it's total bullshit. So I wanted to look into that number, talk about maybe what a more realistic number is, how many undocumented migrants actually are there in London or the UK as a whole, and then I wanted to talk about who those people are, right? How did they come to be in that situation? And I think that can help us much better to talk about real solutions to how we can stop this problem from happening. Because obviously the only solution that's being pushed really hard across the right-wing media and the far right of our politics at the moment is that we should respond to this by increasing deportations. I wanted to put that in the international context of course, the inauguration of President Trump and his mass deportations agenda, and how there's obviously a clear effort to import that kind of hateful Trumpist politics into our UK debate at the current time. And this focus on deportations really reflects that, and how we should be standing up against that, how it doesn't do any good for the UK, and how it really isn't a real solution to any of these problems. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'm going to do that chapter thing along the bottom here so you can skip around if you want to. If this video is of interest to you, it would really help me out if you would like, comment, share, subscribe to my channel if you like. We all know that the right wing has a huge national media platform from which to push this pro-deportations agenda and this fear-mongering about big, scary, made-up numbers about migrants. Whereas someone like me trying to put forward alternative, humane and more workable approaches to how we can manage migration in a way that doesn't harm migrants, but also does the best for our country, well, that platform doesn't exist. And that's why I'm here. And that's why it would really help me out if you could come along and chat with me in the comments or share this video or give it a like. So let's talk about that big 1 in 12 figure. Does it stand up? No, of course it doesn't stand up at all, even under the slightest amount of scrutiny. Telegraph put a thin translucent veil over its arse on the online version of this article, where they say up to 1 in 12 Londoners is an illegal immigrant, but in the print version it was just 1 in 12 of us are. I don't know if you guys ever go shopping on the high street in the sales anymore, but like if you walk past a shop with a big sign on the front that says up to 50% off everything, then, well, I really hope you don't walk in there thinking that you're going to find 50% off everything, because you'll be disappointed. That up to does a whole lot of work. The thing is, we don't even need to get into the part about how many undocumented migrants there really may be in the UK or in London specifically to debunk this 1 in 12 figure from the Telegraph straight away, because they base this calculation on the wrong population of London. I don't know where they get that figure from. I really don't. They use a figure for the population of London of around 7 million. According to the GLA, the most recent figures are that the population of London is very nearly 9 million. And that makes a really big difference if you're calculating the proportion of any subgroup within it. This headline is based off a report that the Telegraph dug up from that well-loved and trusted institution, Thames Water, that was estimating the water usage in London. According to the Telegraph write-up, the report was based on research by the Pew Research Centre published in 2019 and other research by LSE and ONS. I'm really quite familiar with the research into the undocumented migrant population, and I produced some research of my own into their experiences in 2021. So straight away, the Thames Water estimate looked pretty high to me. When you're estimating the number of undocumented migrants in the UK, you're counting something that is by definition kind of hidden. Undocumented migrants can't access social housing, they can't access the welfare state, they can't access bank accounts or driving license, they often won't be registered for tax, they might not have a national insurance number. Like, there's none of the ordinary ways where you might be able to count a population. And so the methodologies used by researchers when they're trying to produce these estimates get really complicated. Most researchers use what's called the residual method. I'm not going to try to explain it now, but I will put links to in the description box if any of you want to look into it in more detail. There's also a big variation in different researchers coming up with different numbers, but all researchers numbers who produce an estimate of this figure give you a range. So usually that's quite a broad range. It's like hundreds of thousands of people. So for example, the Pew Research Centre in 2019 estimated the undocumented population of the UK to be anywhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million people, which is a big range. In 2020, the Greater London Authority, in partnership with the University of Wolverhampton, estimated the undocumented migrant population of between 594,000 and 745,000. So again, you see there's a big range there, but they came out significantly lower than the Pew Research Centre. They also did an estimate of how many of those people were likely to be in London. Now, it stands to reason that most undocumented migrants would be living in London. That's because most migrants who come to the UK come to London. 41% of the foreign-born population live in London, and it's part of what makes our city so bloody brilliant. Obviously, they'd want to come here with the best, what can I say? This is where the work is. This is where family and community who might be able to support you and help you find shelter is. So I don't think that's very controversial that most undocumented migrants are probably in London. So this GLA report also estimated undocumented Londoners in a range from 350,000 to 478,000. The Thames Water report that the Telegraph is drawing on actually had a range from 390,000 to over 585,000. And of course, to generate this scary headline, the Telegraph didn't take for example, the midpoint of that estimate. No, they took the high end of the estimate and they put it into that strange low estimate of the London population as a whole. And that's how they arrived at this overblown figure of 8.4% or 1 in 12 people. You put the high end of the Thames Water estimate, so 585,000 people, into the real London population of nearly 9 million people, it actually goes down to more like 6.4% or 1 in 15 people. So if the Telegraph headline had read up to 1 in 15 Londoners, then it would have been a little bit more defensible at least. But I don't think there's any good reason for just taking the upper end of the estimate when, as I said, the estimate done by the University of Wolverhampton and GLA found a range that was much closer to the lower end of the Thames Water estimate. And if you take the lower end of the Thames Water estimate and you put it into the real London population, 390,000 people into a population of 9 million, well, that's just 4.3% or 1 in 23 people. That's actually half of what the Telegraph headline said. So you realize I'm using the estimates from the same report and I'm using the real population of London instead of a made up population of London. And I've halved the headline figure that the Telegraph reported. This is how the media is completely twisting these numbers to make them sound much scarier than they really are. 1 in 23 people just doesn't sound as much of a big deal as 1 in 12 people. But let's be real, it is still a big deal. It's a very big deal. And 1 in 23 people is still a lot. Even if it's 390,000 people who are living in London without documentation, that is a lot. It reflects a massive failure of our immigration system to have that many people who are trapped on the outside of it. So who are these people? Well, first thing to say is that they've pretty much got nothing to do with the small boats. What we know about the people arriving on small boats is that 99% of them claim asylum on arrival. That is why they come to the UK. They're coming here in order to present themselves to the authorities and claim asylum. They are not hidden. They are not undocumented. Once you are in the asylum system, you are here legally and you are documented with up to and until you get a response to your claim. So people coming on small boats just aren't featured in these numbers at all. The vast majority of the people in these numbers will be people who came to the UK by invitation with a visa, which is permission to come to the UK. They'll have come on a plane for the purpose of work or study or visiting. And then basically they will have been unable to renew their visa in the UK and they will have stayed beyond its terms. And that is when people become undocumented. This is something I go on about a lot, but is the fundamental problem with our immigration system is that it is based on precarity. It is based on keeping people in a temporary status for really, really long periods of time. So you come to the UK and you only have leave to be here for a couple of years at most, 6 months in some cases. And then you have to either leave the country, leave your job, leave your home, or reapply to stay in your job, to stay in your home, to stay in your community and the life you are building here. And you have to pay every time. And that's just a system that is incredibly bad for people's integration, their long-term prospects to settle in the UK and become part of our communities and to build up their families here. It's incredibly damaging and it produces people who fall out of the system and become undocumented. And then, okay, who are these people? Now, I know what you're picturing and it's not your fault. If I say illegal immigrant or undocumented migrant to you, then the image that will pop up in your head is 99% sure to be of a black or brown young single man. And it's not your fault. That's actually the image that pops up in my head, even though I know better. We have been subjected to an onslaught of media conditioning, pushing this image of what this type of migration is, but in fact is totally unrepresentative. So the Pew Research Center looked into the demographics of the undocumented migrant population and found that they were equally split between women and men. In fact, it's that cursed ratio of 52% women and 48% men. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because if you remember that undocumented migrants are usually people who came here on a visa and for one reason or another were not able to maintain that visa, there are lots of ways in which our immigration system specifically makes it difficult for women to maintain that status. For example, if you are a woman who is here on a spouse visa, so your right to be in the UK depends on your male partner, and you are a victim of domestic violence, in some cases, escaping your violent partner can mean losing your immigration status and your right to be in the UK, potentially with your family and your work. So this puts women into incredibly difficult circumstances, and a lot of the women who are undocumented in the UK are survivors of domestic abuse for this reason. The GLA and University of Wolverhampton study also had a really big focus on children and young people. And they found that out of an estimated total of 674,000 undocumented people in the UK, around 215,000 of them were children, and half of those children would have been born in the UK. And this is a really important point, because in the UK, we don't have birthright citizenship. So unlike in, say, the US and in France, if you are born here and you've never lived anywhere else, that does not automatically entitle you to become a citizen. Actually, that right was taken away by the Conservative government in the 1981 British Nationality Act that came into force in 1983. And I probably don't need to tell you that since this was the 80s, it was pretty explicit that that was for racist reasons, that we removed the right of children born in this country to automatically gain citizenship. So that means that there's a whole lot of kids living in this country who have never set foot outside the UK, and yet we would classify them as undocumented migrants. A lot of these families are also mixed status, so that could mean that some of the kids have status and some of the kids don't, or that one of the parents does and one of them doesn't. It immediately gets extremely complicated when you start actually looking at the people involved. I did a piece of research looking at the experiences of the undocumented migrant population in 2021. It's called We Are Here. I did interviews, focus groups, and surveys to understand some of the experiences. And obviously my sample size was really small, but my findings really reflected the findings of these bigger research studies. So for example, the Pew Research Center found that over half of the undocumented migrant population of the UK has been living here for more than 5 years. And that's what I found as well, that people are long-term residents of the UK in many cases. Half of the people I spoke to had kids, and the significant majority had wider family members in the UK. And if you think about it, that just makes sense, because put these things together. Undocumented migrants are not entitled to legally live anywhere. They're not entitled to social housing, but they're not entitled to even legally rent. They are not entitled to open a bank account or get a driver's license. They are not entitled to access the welfare state, any benefits, any state support whatsoever. Actually, I should just add there, almost all migrants who are on visas and their visas are in order are also not entitled to access benefits, right? I cannot repeat enough times that most migrants cannot have access to the welfare state or to benefits of any kind. And if you're undocumented, all the more so. I mean, just think about it. Imagine going along to DWP and trying to sign up for universal credit, and then they ask you who you are, and it turns out you can't prove your right to be in the UK. Well, obviously, you would then be subject to detention and deportation. So you wouldn't do that. So no undocumented migrant has access to state support. And of course, if you are a migrant looking for work in the UK, you have to show your employer your ID to prove your right to be in the UK. This is being digitized at the moment, which is a big problem and a question for another video. But anyway, you have to prove your status in the UK in order to find work legally. So undocumented migrants are not legally able to find work either. So you can't claim benefits, you can't rent a house, and you can't legally find work. But we know that there are overall people who have been living in the UK for years and years and years and have family members. Well, obviously they have family members, because under those circumstances, you would need to be connected to a community that was able to support you. So undocumented migrants are men, women, boys, and girls, and they are people who are intertwined into the lives of other Londoners and other UK residents and other British citizens. And that goes to another of the incredibly stupid elements of our immigration system in the UK, which is that routes to regularisation are incredibly complicated and difficult to access. So the baseline is that you have to be able to prove living in the UK for 20 years for you to regularize your status. This is just insane, because once you've been living in the UK for years and years and years, your life is based here. It becomes less and less meaningful of an option for you to be sent away. So in loads of other countries, there are pathways for people who have lost their regular immigration status, who are long-term residents and have family members in that country, to regularize that status again. But in the UK, we have hardly any. And actually, there's an amazing advocacy group called Regularize that has a petition at the moment that they've just launched on the government website that is calling for a review for shorter and more accessible pathways to regularization. I really, really strongly recommend that you go along and sign that petition so that we can force parliamentarians to have a debate on this issue, because keeping people outside of the immigration system in limbo for years and years and years doesn't actually do anybody any good. Obviously, when you're in those circumstances and you're not legally entitled to any support from the state and you're not legally entitled to work, then you are a perfect victim for the most unscrupulous and evil employers and traffickers and abusers in this country. And that is why this exploitation of workers is able to happen. Our labour inspections in the UK is very tightly linked with Home Office immigration enforcement. So it means that there is basically no way for a worker who is being abused to go and complain and get redress for that abuse, to get the wages that have been withheld from them, or to get an employer who is sexually harassing them or abusing them taken to justice, because it is the worker who is undocumented who is pursued by the government in that case. And this is what we keep doing. And this is why this right-wing push for the response to this to be always more deportations is completely wrong, because you're always just pursuing the people who are churned out by this failed immigration system. If these estimates are right and that many people in London are undocumented, then you've got to think that a significant part of our economy, of the services that we use, are being provided by people without this status. So our economy is actually being propped up by the labor of people who are put into an incredibly vulnerable situation. And if we could just wave a magic wand and deport them all and make them all disappear, then we'd probably be completely screwed in terms of providing those services and those jobs that they have been doing. What we should be doing is letting them access ways to regularize their status again. Instead, if we just keep chasing the people who fall out at the end of this broken system and pursuing them for deportation, then there will always be more people who come through that system and who end up in that same situation. So it provides this permanent boogeyman for the right, and they can come out with these big scary headlines that say ridiculous numbers like the Telegraph one, and everybody can join in into this big moral panic about how we need to be deporting more and more of these people who are here illegally, without ever talking about why this system creates this large undocumented population and therefore cut off the pipeline of exploitable workers. And so, of course, the right don't want us to implement the systemic changes that would actually stop us from having an undocumented migrant population, because they want a very exploitable workforce that can be underpaid, and also because they want a scapegoat and a boogeyman that they can keep pushing this agenda about and eventually use to justify a process of us giving up more and more of our rights. Because it comes back to, of course, we should be leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. We should be throwing out the Human Rights Act. These are institutions that protect every person in this country's rights, your rights and my rights as well. They use this population of people that our system has pushed out as a boogeyman to convince you that you should give up your rights under the Human Rights Act and your rights under the European Convention, because that might get rid of them. When we all know that the only thing that will happen if you do get rid of them is that more people will be put into their place, because we haven't reformed the idiotic immigration system that produces this problem. To my fellow Londoners, please don't worry. There probably isn't an undocumented migrant hiding under your sofa or popping out from inside every telephone box throughout our city. 1 in 12 Londoners are not undocumented migrants, but undocumented migrant Londoners there are. And they are men, women, and children. They are kids that might go to school with your kids. They are people who work in all parts of our economy and who our economy depends on. They are women who have been abused by their husbands and have had to escape from them and lost their status because of that. They are, all of them, people who have been churned out by an immigration system that is not fit for purpose, that is designed to keep people in a precarious and temporary status for as long as possible in order to extract their labor without having to welcome the entire human and help those people to be integrated and full members of our communities for the long term. And this is the direction that our politics around migration continues to go. And this right-wing agenda about pushing for deportations is deeply dehumanizing, and it doesn't do any of us any good. So if you agree, disagree, found any of this interesting, like I say, please come along and have a chat with me in the comments, and I will see you next time.